Rain hammered the pavement outside SeaTac Airport, turning the entire drop-off lane into a mirror of frantic headlights and rushing feet. People hurried toward the sliding doors with umbrellas bent sideways, coats pulled tight, faces tense. I stood beneath the overhang alone, my hands deep in my pockets, watching the rain move in sheets across the concrete. My driver was late, again, but the truth was, I did not really care. I had nowhere I needed to be tonight. No one was waiting. Not a single message buzzed my phone after the conference ended, not even a polite congratulations from someone pretending to care. I exhaled and let my gaze drift across the chaos, letting the cold mist settle on my face. I used to hate nights like this. Now they just felt familiar. A family of 4 rushed by the father lifting his daughter so she would not step in a puddle. She laughed, her voice bright and warm in the air. I looked away quickly. The sound pressed on something inside my chest, something I had learned not to disturb. A few feet ahead, a woman stood near the curb with a small boy beside her. She held a clear plastic bag with cleaning supplies, and the logo on her badge told me she worked night shift inside the terminal. She looked tired, too tired for this storm. The boy, though, looked calm, watchful. He held a stuffed bear so worn it looked like it had survived a lifetime already. The bear drooped from his hand as he stared at the rain, unmoving. A security officer approached them, waving his flashlight with unnecessary authority. The tone in his voice sharpened the moment he saw the woman's uniform. I saw her straighten, already bracing herself. "You cannot wait here," he snapped. "This area is for passengers only." She apologized, explaining her son was only waiting for her to finish her shift. The officer shook his head, insisting she move along. It was the tone more than the words that landed like a blow. Dismissive, suspicious. A tone no one uses on people who look like me. Something in me tightened. Before I realized I had stepped forward, the argument cut through the storm. But the boy noticed me first. His eyes lifted from the pavement and met mine with a kind of steady innocence that does not belong in a place like this. He let go of his mother's sleeve and walked straight into the rain. No hesitation, no fear, just a quiet purpose that froze me where I stood. By the time he reached me, his hood had fallen back and his hair was soaked flat against his forehead. He stopped in front of me and looked up, his voice soft but sure. "My daddy is in heaven. Can you help us get home?" For a moment, the entire airport fell silent. Or maybe it was just me. Maybe the storm had not paused at all. Maybe people still rushed behind us. But I did not hear them. I only heard that one sentence. "My daddy is in heaven. Can you help us get home?" It hit me with a force nothing in my corporate world ever had. Not during a quarterly report. Not during a merger. Not even when reporters called me ruthless. No one had asked me for help in years. Not sincerely, not with trust, not like this. His mother ran toward us, breathless, gripping his shoulders as if she feared he had stepped into danger. "I am so sorry," she said quickly to me. "He did not mean to bother you. He is just being polite." Polite. There was nothing polite about the way he had looked at me. It was truth. It was belief. And something inside me cracked beneath it. The security officer was returning, clearly ready to continue chastising her. Before he could speak, I stepped between them without raising my voice. "They are with me." The officer hesitated, taken aback by the certainty in my tone and by the suit I was wearing. That was enough for him. It should not have been, but it was. He nodded stiffly and backed away. The boy looked up at me again, water streaming down his cheeks in twin lines that might have been tears, but were only rain. "Can you help us get home?" he repeated. I knelt so I was eye level with him. "What is your name?" "Milo," he said. "And your mom?" "Elise." I looked at her. She looked embarrassed, defensive, tired, proud, all at the same time. She reached for Milo's hand, but he kept his gaze on me. Something in his steadiness unsettled me in a way I could not explain. Finally, I said quietly, "Yes, I can." When I stood again, Elise exhaled a breath she had been holding. She nodded once, something like gratitude passing through her eyes, though she tried to hide it. As we walked toward the covered lane, Milo tugged my sleeve and pointed at the sky. The clouds were thick, bruised with storm, but he whispered as if telling me a secret. "Do you think Daddy can see us from up there?" And in that moment, something inside me shifted, and something in my eyes must have softened, because Milo smiled. The three of us stood beneath the weak shelter of the airport overhang, the rain still coming down in relentless sheets just a few feet from where we stood. Water streamed off the edge of the canopy like a curtain loud enough that we had to speak a little louder to hear each other. I could feel the cold in my suit jacket, the dampness clinging to the cuffs, but none of it mattered. Milo was still watching me with those steady, impossibly calm eyes, and Elise hovered behind him with a mixture of apology and protectiveness that made her seem both fragile and unbreakable at the same time. I lifted my hand slightly toward my car parked a ways down the lane. But before I said anything, Elise stepped forward, her voice low but firm. "I appreciate your kindness truly, but we do not get into cars with people we do not know." There was no accusation in her tone, just a practiced boundary. One I respected. I nodded. "Of course. I would not expect you to." Milo tilted his head, confused. "But he is helping us." Elise gently placed a hand on his shoulder. "And he is being very kind," she said softly. "But kindness and trust are not the same thing." She looked at me then, meeting my eyes fully for the first time. Her gaze did not waver. "If you do not mind, could you give us a moment?" I stepped back without hesitation. "Take all the time you need." Elise knelt in front of Milo, speaking quietly, but the storm muffled her words. I could only see her hands moving gently, hear faint pieces of reassurance. She checked her phone, typed something, and paused. She looked up at me again. "Before anything else, I need to know your name." Her voice was steady and direct. It struck me how rare that was in my world. People usually addressed me with rehearsed politeness, not simplicity. "Jonah," I said. "Jonah Hale." Her expression shifted slightly, like she recognized the name, but could not place it. Then she nodded once. "I am Elise. This is Milo." Milo raised the stuffed bear in his arms as if introducing him to. "And this is Mr. Fox." The bear did not look like a fox at all, but I accepted the introduction with a solemn nod that made Milo giggle for the first time that night. Elise's posture softened. She took out her phone again. "I am sending my sister your license plate number." I nodded approvingly. "Good, and I am calling her before we get in." "Perfect. I would expect nothing less." Her brows lifted, surprised by how easily I agreed, and something unspoken eased in the air between us. She dialed, spoke briefly to someone named Nora, gave my plate number, the make and color of my car, and even described my height and suit. When she finished, she looked at me again as if waiting to see whether I would be offended. I was not. In fact, for the first time in a long while, I felt the faintest tug of admiration. "Thank you for being careful," I said quietly. "You should be." The rain softened slightly as we walked toward the car, the kind of pause that feels like the sky catching its breath. I unlocked the doors, opened the back seat for Milo, and stepped aside to give Elise room. Still, Elise hesitated. She was caught between gratitude and fear, and every muscle in her body showed it. I am not doing this because I expect anything I said, keeping my voice low, steady, intentional. And if at any point you want me to pull over, just say so. No questions. Her shoulders relaxed just enough. She helped Milo climb in, buckled him, double-checked the belt, then slipped into the passenger seat with the kind of caution someone only develops after surviving too many disappointments. As soon as she closed the door, the world outside became a muted blur of rain. The inside of the car was warm, softly lit by the dashboard glow. Milo leaned forward between the seats, hugging Mr. Fox tightly. "Thank you for helping us get home," he said again. I glanced at him through the mirror. "You did not look scared out there. Most kids would be." He shrugged in the matter-of-fact way children do when something feels normal to them. "I get scared after. Not during." Elise's breath caught. She turned toward the window, pretending to watch the streaks of rain. But even from where I sat, I could see the guilt flicker across her face. She had been carrying too much alone for too long. I started the car. The engine purred quietly. Elise kept her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She watched the road, watched the sidewalks, watched the rain. It took several minutes before she whispered, "You did not have to step in with the security officer." Yes, I did. Her eyes shifted toward me, but she did not speak. Most people do not intervene, she said finally. I know. That was the part I could not stop thinking about. Most people walk by. Most people pretend not to see. I exhaled slowly. He looked so certain when he walked up to me. Like, he believed I would help. I could not ignore that. Elise looked back at Milo, who was now tracing shapes on the fogged window with one finger. He does that, she murmured. He believes people are better than they are. He is usually right. Milo leaned forward again. Mr. Fox thinks you are good too. Elise groaned softly. Milo. But he just smiled, and for the first time all night, Elise smiled too tired, but real. Something inside my chest tightened. I had not seen a smile like that directed at me in years. Outside, the rain fell harder again, drumming on the roof in steady rhythm. But inside, the space felt unexpectedly calm, safe, quiet, like something new had taken root in the silence. The rain softened into a steady whisper against the car windows as we pulled away from the airport, the world outside turning into blurred streaks of streetlights and reflections. Inside the car, the warmth settled slowly like a blanket unfolding over the three of us. Milo leaned forward from the back seat again, his chin resting on the edge of my headrest as if he had known me much longer than 20 minutes. Mr. Fox sat on his lap, lopsided and damp, one ear bent so far it pointed sideways. I kept my eyes on the road, but I could feel his gaze studying me with a quiet intensity children seem to be born with. Adults pretend not to notice things. Children do not bother pretending. Milo tilted his head. You look tired, he said softly. His honesty startled a quiet laugh out of me. Do I? He nodded, but not the sleepy kind, the inside kind. For a moment, my hands tightened on the steering wheel. Elise inhaled sharply. Milo. That is not polite, she warned, embarrassed. It is all right, I said before she could finish. He is not wrong. Milo tapped Mr. Fox's head against the back of my seat. He thinks you had a sad day, maybe even a sad week. I glanced at him in the mirror, and Milo stared back with those clear, unsettling eyes that seemed to see past my tailored suit, past my practiced composure, straight into the places I never let anyone look. What makes you think that? I asked quietly. Milo shrugged the way kids do when the answer feels obvious. People who are not sad hum. You do not hum. You breathe like you are trying not to break. Elise pressed a hand to her forehead. Milo, sweetie, let the man drive. But she looked at me then uncertain, as if wondering whether her son had accidentally stepped on something raw. He had. I swallowed the tightness creeping up my throat and kept my eyes fixed on the glowing road ahead. The last person who noticed how I breathed had been my younger brother years before everything fell apart. Milo leaned back, adjusting his stuffed animal, but he was not done studying me. What do you do for work? He asked. It was innocent curiosity, nothing more. But the question hit strangely. No child had ever asked me that without someone coaching them, usually in rooms with chandeliers and handshakes and extravagant holiday parties. I run a company, I answered. A big one, like a toy company. Not exactly. His brows pinched. Do you like your job? The simplest questions always hit the hardest. I paused long enough that Elise turned slightly in her seat as if she too wanted to hear the answer. My voice came out lower than I expected. I used to. Milo absorbed that for a moment, then went back to drawing shapes on the fogged window with his finger. 2 circles, a star, a crooked heart. Elise wrapped her arms around herself, watching the lights flicker by outside. After a while, she spoke, her voice soft but layered with something unspoken. He notices things he should not notice. I nodded. Kids like him usually do. She turned toward me, her expression shifting, curiosity creeping in where caution had been. Do you have children? No. I kept my tone even, but something in the quiet of the car made the word heavier than usual. Milo seemed satisfied with the answer, but Elise watched me a little longer, her eyes tracing the edges of a truth she could not see yet. The truth that I once knew what it felt like to look after someone smaller than me, someone who trusted me, someone I failed. Milo yawned, rubbing his eyes with the back of his fist. Elise reached back to straighten his jacket. She did it automatically with the kind of gentleness you can only learn from loving someone so fiercely that you forget your own exhaustion. I lowered the heater a little so the air would not make him too warm. Elise noticed. "Thank you," she murmured. I shrugged lightly. "Just trying to help." Her lips curved into something like a smile, brief and tired but real. The first smile she had offered me freely. And then, as if on cue, Milo piped up again. "Do you live alone?" I hesitated. "Yes." "Does it get lonely?" Elise's head snapped around toward him, but she said nothing. She wanted to hear too. I tightened my jaw, searching for an answer that did not reveal too much and yet did not lie. "Sometimes." Milo considered that carefully. Then he leaned forward until his cheek rested against the edge of my seat again. "Mommy says lonely people forget how to look up, that they do not see the sky anymore." Elise's breath hitched. "Milo, stop." But I could not breathe for a moment. Not because of the boy's words, but because of how much truth was wrapped inside them. My brother had once said almost the same thing. "Look up, Jonah. Dad says people who look down only see what they lost. People who look up see what is left." I gripped the wheel harder, trying to steady the sudden flicker of memory. Before the silence could settle into something too heavy, Milo lifted Mr. Fox toward me. "He wants to know if you saw the sky today." I cleared my throat. "No, I did not." Milo nodded as if he had expected that answer. "It is okay. We saw it for you." Elise's eyes shimmered at that, though she blinked quickly to hide it. The farther we drove, the more the tension in the car eased, turning into something like a fragile thread of connection woven between three people who had no reason to share anything at all, yet somehow did. When we reached the intersection before their neighborhood, Milo whispered almost to himself, "Mom, I like him." Elise did not respond, but she glanced at me, her face softening in a way that made something unfamiliar stir inside my chest. The kind of stirring that comes when someone sees you in a way you did not expect to be seen. The rain returned suddenly, a fast, heavy curtain that made the world outside blur into streaks of silver. The wipers struggled to keep up as I turned onto the narrower residential street leading toward their building. Streetlights flickered through the downpour, creating brief flashes across the wet pavement. Milo leaned forward again, pressing his face to the fogged window, fascinated by the storm. Elise reached back instinctively, her hand resting on his knee as if she could anchor him through sheer instinct. The road curved gently to the left, pooling water collecting along the edges. I slowed the car, mindful of every shift in the tires, but a sharp turn in the road forced me closer to the curb than I liked. That was when it happened. A sudden rise in the pavement, a bump made nearly invisible under the rainwater, caught the front tire at the exact moment the back tire hit a shallow pothole. The car jolted just enough for Milo to lose his balance and tip sideways in his seat. His seatbelt caught him, but the sudden motion made him gasp in panic, and Elise twisted in her seat so quickly she nearly unbuckled herself. "Milo!" Her voice cracked sharp with fear. "I braked harder than I intended." The car lurched forward with a muted thud, the seatbelts tightening around us. For a split second, the only sound in the car was Milo's short, uneven breathing, the kind that teeters between shock and tears. I froze. That moment, the world outside vanished, replaced by nothing but the pounding in my chest and the image of Milo half slipping, half caught by the belt. Elise unbuckled before I could stop her. She shifted into the back seat and cupped Milo's face in her hands. "Are you hurt? Talk to me." Her voice trembled, but her movements were steady, practiced protective. Milo blinked hard, his lower lip quivering. "I am okay," he whispered, but his voice was so faint it barely held together. His small fingers gripped her sleeves like he was afraid of slipping again. The guilt hit me like a punch, sudden and brutal. I had not done anything reckless, but that did not matter. I should have anticipated the way water hides imperfections in the road. I should have slowed even more. I should have not been the reason a child's breathing turned shaky and afraid. Elise looked at me, then her eyes sharp, scanning my expression as if searching for negligence or carelessness or something she could direct her fear toward. But she found none of that. Only the weight in my chest. Only the apology already forming behind my teeth. "I am so sorry," I said quietly. I should have seen the bump coming. Elise's shoulders stiffened, but not from anger. From the exhaustion of a woman who has spent too many moments holding the world together with her bare hands. "It is not your fault," she said, but her voice shook. I could tell she was speaking to stop Milo from spiraling more than to comfort me. Milo swallowed hard. His eyes glistened, but he nodded bravely. "I am okay, Mom." Elise pulled him into a gentle embrace, smoothing his damp hair, whispering something too soft for me to hear. I stayed still, gripping the wheel, letting the rain drum against the car as if it were expressing everything I wanted to say but couldn't. After a moment, Milo looked up. His voice trembled, but he forced a tiny smile. "The bump surprised me. That is all." I nodded once, but my throat felt too tight to speak. Elise climbed back into the front seat with a slow exhale. Her hands were shaking slightly as she buckled her seatbelt. I waited for her to look at me before moving the car again. She finally lifted her eyes. The anger I had expected wasn't there. Something else was. The look of someone who has been alone so long that fear always comes first. But beside that fear was something I did not expect. Trust. Fragile, cautious, reluctant trust, but real. "Just go slow," she whispered. I nodded. "I will." I pulled the car forward at half the previous speed, every motion deliberately smooth. Milo stayed unusually quiet in the back seat, holding Mr. Fox close to his chest. The stuffed animal looked almost as shaken as he did. A few minutes later, the rain softened again. Elise turned enough to check on her son, her hand reaching back instinctively. He laced his fingers with hers, calming her more than himself. That was when he spoke again in that small, hesitant voice I had already learned meant he was trying to hide how he really felt. "Jonah." "Yes. Did something scare you too?" I hesitated. Children see everything. I met his eyes in the rearview mirror. "Yes," I said honestly. "I did not like seeing you scared." Elise turned slightly surprise flickering across her face at the confession. Milo nodded slowly as if that answer made him feel less alone. "I think the bump scared everybody then," he said matter-of-factly. "Even Mr. Fox." Elise let out a small laugh, thin but real. Something in my chest eased at the sound. The tension slowly left the car, replaced by the soft hum of the engine and the steady beat of the rain. But the moment lingered with all three of us. Milo pressed his cheek to the window. "Are we almost home?" "Yes," Elise whispered. "We are." But something about the way she said it made me wonder if she meant more than the apartment building we were driving toward. The rhythm of the rain softened even further, turning into the kind of quiet backdrop that allows the heart to realize what it is still holding. When we reached the intersection before their street, Elise turned to me again. Her voice was different now, calmer, almost grateful. "Thank you for stopping so fast," she murmured. Some people would not have reacted in time. Something warm flickered through me. Relief. And something else I could not name yet. "You do not need to thank me," I said quietly, "but I am glad he is okay." We turned into their road. Milo leaned forward again, his voice small but sure. "Jonah." "Yes, Milo. Are you coming inside with us so Mr. Fox knows we are safe?" That single question hit harder than I expected. Elise inhaled startled, but she did not correct him. She waited, watching me. The rain slowed to a gentle whisper as I pulled up to their building, and I realized then that this moment, this question was the first thread of something none of us fully understood yet. The car idled softly at the curb headlights, casting pale streaks across the wet pavement. The rain had thinned to a mist fragile enough to look almost like breath against the night. Milo held Mr. Fox tightly as he peered through the window at the familiar outline of his apartment building. Normally, this was the moment a child would unbuckle, rush toward the door, maybe tug his mother along with eagerness to get inside. But Milo stayed still. His eyes flicked toward me in the mirror again. His voice was quiet but steady when he repeated the question that had settled deep inside my chest. "Are you coming inside so Mr. Fox knows we are safe?" Elise inhaled sharply, not loudly, but enough that I heard the surprise she swallowed. Her hand rested on the door handle as if preparing to guide the moment gently to redirect her son to maintain the boundary she had every right to enforce. I expected her to step in immediately, Instead, she met my eyes. It wasn't permission. It wasn't an invitation. It was a question layered beneath another. What will you do with this moment? I didn't answer right away. I saw the way her fingers tightened on the door handle, not in fear, but in reflex. A mother who had lived long enough on the defensive. A woman who had no space left for risks that could wound her or her child. The weight of that realization made my next words careful and slow. "Elise," I said, not looking at Milo first, but at her. "Only if you're comfortable with it." Her breath softened. She closed her eyes for half a second, grounding herself in the way someone does when their heart and mind are not aligned yet. "Jonah," she murmured, "we barely know each other." She said it gently, but the truth behind it landed hard. And yet the air inside the car didn't shift to rejection. It shifted to honesty. I nodded once. "I know." A long silence followed, the kind that tests intentions more than words ever could. Milo hugged Mr. Fox closer. "Mom." His voice trembled slightly, not from fear, but from worry. Elise turned immediately, brushing her thumb across his cheek. "I am right here, sweetheart. You are okay." He nodded, but didn't look away from me. "Gabriel said something earlier. It echoed through my mind now. Your teacher says sad people do not always cry." I exhaled slowly. Elise's gaze returned to me, searching steady. Before she could speak again, I reached for my phone and unlocked it, placing its screen up on the center console. She watched as I opened a notepad. I typed my full name, my company address, my email, and my personal cell number, and slid the phone toward her. "Take a picture," I said quietly, "and send it to someone you trust before I walk you inside." Her eyes widened for just a second, startled at the directness, but also at the respect behind it. For a man who spent his entire life guarded offering this level of transparency, felt like stripping down armor I'd worn so long it had fused to me. Elise lifted her phone with steady hands and photographed the screen. Then she texted it immediately to someone named Claire. Her thumb hovered as she typed an additional message. "Walking inside with him. If something feels off, I will call you." A moment later, her phone buzzed with a reply. A simple, "Okay, but share your location." Elise turned her location tracking on. She didn't hide any of this from me. She didn't soften the distrust. She didn't pretend. And strangely, I respected her more for that than anything else she'd done tonight. When she finished, I nodded once in acknowledgement. "Thank you," I said. Not sarcastic, not dismissive, genuine. She stared at me for a moment as if still deciding whether to categorize me as danger anomaly or possibility. Then she spoke softly. "Milo trusts you. I haven't seen him do that with anyone in a long time." Her voice wavered. "But trust has to be earned. Every time." I met her gaze fully then. "I understand. And I'm willing to earn it." Slowly, she unbuckled her seatbelt. She stepped out of the car first and opened the back door for Milo, lifting him out with practiced tenderness. The air was cool, carrying the faint smell of wet concrete and the rustle of a nearby tree. Milo leaned into her hip, still holding Mr. Fox, still staring at me, with the kind of hope only children know how to express without fear of rejection. Elise turned toward the building entrance, then paused. She looked back at me again. A quiet question flickered in her eyes, softer now, and for the first time her caution loosened enough to let something else slip through. "Come on then," she said quietly. "If you'd still like to walk us in." Not an invitation to stay, not an opening to anything she wasn't ready for, but a willingness to share the next 3 minutes of her life with me. A choice, a cautious one, a human one. I stepped out of the car and locked it behind me. The night air met my skin with a cool sharpness that felt grounding. I kept my distance as we approached the building entrance, letting her lead the way, letting her energy determine the distance between us. Milo looked up at me as we climbed the single concrete step under the flickering porch light. "Jonah." "Yes, buddy. Now Mr. Fox and I feel safe." Elise froze. The kind of freeze that happens when something hits the exact bruise you've been protecting for years. She looked down at her son, then slowly at me. I saw the moment her breath caught. I saw the moment something softened, and I realized this tiny stretch of sidewalk was far more significant than any corporate decision I'd ever made. When we reached the door, she turned her keys in the lock, then held the door open. The hallway beyond was dim, warm, carrying the faint scent of old carpet and detergent. She didn't invite me inside. She didn't need to. The choice had already been made. For now. For tonight. And for the first time in years, I was grateful for a moment that asked nothing from me except presence. Inside the hallway, the soft hum of an old heater filled the silence, creating a cocoon of warmth that contrasted sharply with the cold drizzle outside. The carpet was worn a faded burgundy runner that had probably been replaced in segments over the years, each patch carrying its own history of footsteps. Elise wiped her shoes on the mat, then helped Milo do the same before she gestured toward the stairs. Her voice was calm, but carried that familiar caution I had noticed from the beginning. "We live on the second floor. Old building. Stairs are a little uneven." I nodded and followed a step behind, letting her take the lead. Milo hopped on each stair like they were small mountains he was conquering, Mr. Fox dangling by its tail from one hand. Every few steps he turned to check if I was still there, as though making sure the world hadn't shifted in the last 3 seconds. When we reached the landing, Elise unlocked the door to their apartment. The hinges creaked softly, as if greeting her with weary familiarity. The inside was simple, clean lived in. Warm yellow light spilled from a lamp in the corner. A small bookshelf crowded with children's books leaned slightly to one side. A table beneath the window held a thrifted vase with 2 daisies drooping but still bright. It was the kind of home that was held together not by money, but by effort and care. "You can stay there," Elise said, pointing gently toward the entryway mat. "Just while I get him settled." I nodded and stayed where I was not stepping further inside. My presence felt large in the small space, and I didn't want to intrude. Elise knelt to help Milo take off his shoes and jacket. He wiggled excitedly, then pointed at the small mug sitting on the counter. "Mom, can I have warm milk? It will make Mr. Fox sleepy." Elise smiled, a real one this time, tired but soft. "Fine, but only if you brush your teeth right after." He nodded solemnly, as if she had just handed him a diplomatic mission. She went to the small kitchen nook and filled a tiny mug with milk. I watched her shoulders rise and fall as she turned on the microwave. The room was painted in soft hues, the kind worn down by years of being touched by life. I felt myself breathe differently here, more quietly, as though loudness would crack something delicate. Milo wandered back to me, clutching Mr. Fox like a guardian. "Jonah." "Yes." "Do you live alone?" The question landed heavier than he knew. "I do," I answered. Milo nodded slowly as though storing that fact away. "Like Mr. Fox before he met me." I smiled at that. "I suppose so." Elise returned with the warm milk and handed it to Milo, who sipped it with an exaggerated sigh of contentment. She glanced at me, then her eyes studying mine, as though trying to understand why I was still standing on the doormat, choosing not to shift the air around her space. "You can sit," she finally said. Not an invitation of comfort, more like permission. And I understood the difference. I stepped inside and sat at the small table near the window. My knees brushed against the underside. The table was too low for me, but perfect for her and Milo. Elise joined me briefly while Milo finished his milk and scampered off to the bathroom to brush his teeth. She tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "Thank you for walking us in." Her voice was quieter now, a notch softer than earlier. It made something inside me feel unsteady. I shrugged lightly. "You did all the hard work. I just followed instructions." She huffed a faint laugh, the kind that escapes before you realize you let it out. Then she folded her hands in front of her fingers, intertwined pale from the cold. "I don't usually let people get this far into our night routine." She said it without accusation, without expectation. Just truth. "I know," I said quietly. "That is why I am being careful." Her eyes lifted slightly at that. Not in surprise, but in recognition. Milo returned, then, breath smelling like bubblegum toothpaste pajamas, mismatched hair sticking up. He climbed onto her lap and curled into her side as naturally as if that was the only place in the world his body knew how to rest. Elise kissed the top of his head. "Ready for bed?" He nodded, already half asleep. She stood and carried him to a small bedroom. The light spilled briefly into the hall before she closed the door halfway, leaving a sliver of glow between us. I sat there in the quiet. No phone, no briefcase, no noise. Just a small apartment filled with traces of a life I did not expect to witness tonight. 5 minutes later, she returned, wiping her hands on her jeans. He's out. He falls asleep fast when he feels safe. Her words lingered, not because of what they implied about Milo, but because of what they implied about me. She walked to the table and sat across from me. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The apartment hummed with its small noises, pipes settling, the radiator clicking gently. Then Elise's voice came low, unguarded, unhurried. "What made you stop?" I looked up. "Stop what?" She met my gaze. "In the rain, when Milo walked up to you." There were 100 ways to answer. None of them felt correct. So I spoke the closest thing to truth I understood, because he looked at me like I mattered. Elise blinked. Her eyes softened in a way that struck me more deeply than I expected. "You do matter, Jonah." She said it like she was reminding herself too. And before I could respond, she reached for 2 mugs from the counter and filled them with warm water and a spoonful of cocoa powder. She set one in front of me. Milo calls this cozy chocolate. I wrapped my hands around the mug. The warmth seeped into my palms, and for the first time that night, I felt the cold leave my bones. Quiet intimacy, I realized, wasn't about proximity or romance. It was about the silence between two people feeling less heavy than it did before. Elise took a sip, then exhaled gently. "I don't let people in easily." "Neither do I admitted. She looked up, meeting my eyes in a way that didn't shy away or push forward. Just met me exactly where I was. Maybe, she said softly, that is why Milo walked up to you. Children see things we forget how to notice. Something flickered in my chest at that. Something unfamiliar but not unwelcome. And in the stillness of that tiny apartment with warm cocoa between our hands and quiet settling around us like a blanket, I felt something shift. Something small. Something important. The next morning arrived with the kind of gray light that made everything feel heavier than it should. I had barely slept, replaying the night in quiet loops, wondering why sitting in Elise's kitchen had felt more grounding than the last 10 years of my life combined. By the time I reached the office, the fluorescent lights felt harsher, the halls colder, and every conversation around me seemed distant and metallic. My assistant followed me into my office with a stack of documents and a list of urgent items, but I barely heard her, because all I could think about was the way Elise's voice had softened when she said Milo falls asleep fast when he feels safe. Safe. The word had stayed with me like a warm imprint on cold skin. Hours dragged by until lunchtime when the rain began again. It streaked against the glass walls of my office, tapping out a pattern that reminded me too much of that night at the airport. I stared at my reflection in the window, wondering how someone with everything could feel so quietly hollow, and why one woman's tired smile and one child's trust had filled that hollow space without even trying. I should have gone home. I should have buried myself in work. Instead, I found myself driving toward their neighborhood without fully realizing I had made the decision. The closer I got, the more the world seemed to slow. By the time I climbed the uneven stairs to their apartment door, each step felt like it carried something fragile in its rhythm. I hesitated before knocking, unsure if I was crossing a line, but something in my chest urged me forward. When the door opened, Elise stood there wearing the same worn sweater from the night before, but her face was different, pale, exhausted. Something raw shimmered just beneath her eyes. "Elise." I kept my voice soft. "Is everything all right?" She didn't answer immediately, swallowing once before stepping aside to let me in. The apartment looked the same, but felt different, as though the air itself had absorbed whatever she was feeling. Milo was on the couch, curled under a blanket, watching cartoons without his usual spark. Elise walked past him and into the kitchen, leaning against the counter with both hands gripping its edge. I followed, keeping a respectful distance. "What happened?" She shook her head, lips pressed into a thin line before she finally spoke. "My shift changed today, without notice." Her voice cracked slightly. "They cut my hours. Again." I frowned. "Why?" She let out a hollow laugh. "Budget issues. That is what they always say. But it is never the men who lose hours. Never the ones who come in late or leave early. Always the women who cannot afford to complain. Her hands trembled once before she folded her arms tightly over her chest. I watched her carefully, the fragile tension in her posture, the way her shoulder blades pulled inward like she was bracing herself against a storm no one else could see. "I am sorry," I said quietly. Elise lifted her chin. Her voice rose brittle and shaking. "Sorry does not fix a rent bill, Jonah." And then it happened. Something inside her cracked. Her breath hitched sharp and painful, and suddenly she was covering her face with both hands as her shoulders shook. She wasn't loud, not wailing, not dramatic, just breaking, quietly, completely, in the way people do only when they've held everything together for too long. I froze at first, every instinct telling me to reach for her to steady her, but I forced myself still. Touch, uninvited, was not safety. It was intrusion. So I spoke softly instead. "Elise, I am here. No rush, no fixing. Just here." She slid down the side of the counter until she sat on the floor, knees drawn up, hands still hiding her face. I lowered myself slowly until I sat a few feet away, close enough to show I wasn't leaving far enough to give her space. Her breaths came in ragged bursts. "I hate this," she whispered through trembling fingers. "I hate feeling like everything depends on me, and I am one mistake from losing it all. I hate that Milo sees me tired. I hate that he sees me scared." I shook my head. "He sees you trying. He sees you loving him through every limitation the world throws at you. That is not something to hate." Her hands dropped to her lap, revealing red eyes filled with anguish. "You do not understand," she said quietly. "You have people. You have a safety net. You have a life that does not crumble if one thing goes wrong." I held her gaze. "I lost my brother because I believed that too." Elise blinked slowly. Something softened just enough for her to breathe again. She did not speak. Neither did I. The silence between us shifted from breaking to mending. Milo peeked around the corner, then eyes wide, sensing the heaviness in the air. He walked over silently, clutching Mr. Fox in one hand. "Mom!" His small voice cracked something deeper inside me than Elise's tears had. Elise wiped her face quickly, trying to gather herself. "I am okay, baby." Milo shook his head. "No, you are sad. I want to sit with you." Without waiting, he climbed into her lap, curling against her chest. Elise wrapped her arms around him, burying her face in his hair. Her tears slowed, her breathing steadied, and I felt something inside me shift again. Watching them together, mother and son holding each other like they were both trying to keep the world from falling apart, I felt the unmistakable ache of wanting to protect something that wasn't mine. Not possession, not saviorism, just presence. Real grounding presence. Elise looked at me over Milo's head. Her voice was soft, almost unsteady. "Thank you for staying." I nodded once. "You do not have to stand alone every time the world shakes." Her lips pressed together. A silent acceptance. Not of me, not of help, but of the fact that she did not have to fracture in the dark anymore. Something had changed between us. Not romance, not yet, but trust. The first real thread of it. And as I watched Elise hold her son, her strength cracked open and stitched itself back together in the same moment I understood something I hadn't known before. This was the beginning of a fall, not downward, but inward, into something deeper than either of us had planned. The next morning unfolded slowly, the kind of morning where the sky seemed unsure whether to brighten or dim, lingering in a soft gray that made the world quieter than usual. I found myself standing outside Elise's apartment again, a toolbox in one hand and a bag of fresh pastries in the other. I had not planned the visit. I had simply driven until I found myself here, as if some part of me had decided that showing up mattered more than explaining why. I knocked lightly. No response at first. Then the soft shuffle of footsteps, the click of a lock, and the door cracked open just enough for Elise to peer through. Her eyes widened slightly when she saw me. "Jonah." She sounded surprised, not displeased, just caught between curiosity and caution. I lifted the bag a little. "Breakfast. And the toolbox." She blinked. "Did something break?" "Yes," I said before I could stop myself. "Your front door lock." She blinked again this time with a small huff of laughter. That is not how locks work, Jonah. I shrugged. Humor was unfamiliar territory, but something about her made it possible. Are you going to let me in? She hesitated for half a breath, then opened the door wider. Come on, then. The moment I stepped inside, Milo ran toward me, still in pajamas, hair pointing in 6 different directions. Jonah, look! He held up a crayon, drawing a riot of colors that vaguely resembled 3 stick figures, one tall one medium one, and one small one with orange circles floating over its head. Is that us? I asked. Milo nodded proudly. That is you, that is Mom, and that is me with superpowers. I knelt to study the picture. What are your superpowers? He grinned, making people less sad. Elise froze in the kitchen doorway, her expression shifting into something soft and aching at once. I looked at her, but she quickly turned away, pretending to busy herself with the pastries I had brought. Milo tugged on my sleeve. Can you fix our door now? It is squeaky. I smiled. Yes, I can do that. Elise glanced over her shoulder. You do not have to. I know. I picked up the toolbox and went to examine the door. It was slightly misaligned, causing the metal to scrape the frame. A simple fix. As I adjusted the hinges, Milo hovered beside me, offering commentary that made no sense, but filled the space with a warmth I hadn't felt in a long time. When I finished, the door opened smoothly, no sound at all. Milo gasped as though I had performed a magic trick. It is quiet now. I closed the toolbox. Mission accomplished. Elise leaned against the counter, arms lightly crossed, her face unreadable but gentler than yesterday. You fixed it, she said softly. I nodded. It is what people do. They fix things that can be fixed. Something flickered in her eyes at that, a private thought she chose not to voice. Instead, she nodded toward the table. Sit. Eat. You brought breakfast. We should not let it get cold. I joined them at the small table, the same one where we had shared cocoa 2 nights before. The pastries were warm and flaky, and for a moment it felt like the world outside did not exist. Milo chattered between bites, telling me about school, about his dream from last night, about how Mr. Fox wanted his own bed. Elise watched him with a kind of tenderness that made my chest tighten. After breakfast, Milo grabbed his crayons again and settled on the floor. Elise stood to rinse the plates, but I followed her to the sink. Let me. She shook her head. You brought the food. I can clean. So we did it together side by side, the quiet between us comfortable in a way that felt new. When the dishes were done, she wiped her hands on a towel, then turned to me with hesitance lingering in her expression. Why are you really here, Jonah? The question was gentle but precise. She was not accusing. She was trying to understand. I weighed my words carefully. Because yesterday mattered. Because you mattered. And because leaving you alone in that moment did not feel right. Her throat bobbed in a swallow. She looked away for a second as though steadying herself. Most people run when they see someone break. I leaned a little closer but kept my voice quiet. I am not most people. She met my gaze again, and for a second we stood in the gravity of something neither of us was ready to name. The moment broke when Milo's voice rang out. Jonah, come look. He held up another drawing. This one was different. It was the same 3 stick figures as before, but now the taller one and the medium one had their arms slightly angled toward the small one in the middle. And above all 3, Milo had drawn a crooked yellow sun. What is this? I asked softly. Milo grinned. It is a family. Elise stiffened. Her breath hitched almost imperceptibly. I glanced at her, but she could not meet my eyes. I looked back at Milo, choosing my words with care. It is a beautiful drawing. He nodded proudly. It is us, but not yet. Something in my chest cracked open. Elise let out a slow exhale, fragile around the edges. She knelt beside Milo, smoothing his hair with a shaky hand. You draw very big ideas, sweetheart. Milo shrugged. It is because I feel them. He turned back to his crayons. Elise stood facing away from him. Her voice came low, so only I could hear it. He has never drawn anyone else with us. Not once. I understood the weight of that, the hope inside it, the danger inside it too. I stepped closer, careful not to crowd her. Children see things we do not want to admit yet. Elise let out a quiet laugh that trembled. Do not make this harder, Jonah. I shook my head gently. I am not trying to. I am just telling the truth. She looked up then, and for the first time I saw something in her expression I had not seen before. Trust. Not full, not certain, but present. Like the first thinned ray of dawn after a long night. And it struck me that all of this, every fragile thread connecting us, had come from moments so small they could have been missed. A repaired lock, warm pastries, a drawing made with hope bigger than the paper it was on. These were the beginnings of something neither of us had asked for, but both of us in different ways needed. Elise cleared her throat, voice soft. Thank you for today. For showing up. For the door. For everything. I nodded once. Sometimes showing up is the only thing that matters. She held my gaze for a long moment. Then she whispered almost too quietly to hear. Please do not disappear. My breath caught. I will not, I said, even though some part of me feared I might, because wanting to stay and knowing how to stay were not always the same thing. But for now, hope lived in the room with us. Small, bright, fragile, and real. The next few days unfolded with a fragile kind of steadiness, the type that feels almost borrowed, as if the world is holding its breath, waiting to see whether the smallest shift might shatter it. I visited Elise and Milo twice after the morning with the pastries, each time under some harmless pretext. A coffee I happened to be carrying, a spare set of hooks she had mentioned needing, a book for Milo that I claimed had been left in my car. Each visit carried no promise, no expectation, just presence. And each time, Elise's eyes softened a little more at the sight of me, though she never said it aloud. Milo, on the other hand, reacted with a kind of pure joy that disarmed me every time. I realized I had begun to expect his little footsteps running toward the door when I knocked the way he would thrust a new drawing into my hand before I even crossed the threshold. 3 figures had become the recurring theme, always the same configuration. Always the same hope spelled in crooked lines and bright colors. I kept those drawings in a folder in my office tucked between reports and contracts, as if placing them among the responsibilities of my life might ground something in me. But steadiness has a way of making you forget that change rarely asks permission. It was a Thursday evening rain whispering against my office windows when the first message came through. A single text from my board chair. We need you on a call. Now! I frowned but joined the video meeting. Rows of serious faces filled the screen, illuminated by the blue-white glow of corporate urgency. The CFO cleared his throat. There is a situation. He clicked something. A set of investigative headlines appeared on the shared screen, each worse than the last. Insider trading allegations, leaked documents, a whistleblower naming executives. The company's name blazed across every headline like a wound. My jaw tightened. Who else knows? Enough, the chair said grimly. Stockholders are demanding accountability. They need leadership visibly present. They need you. My stomach tightened in a way that felt eerily familiar, like the ache of losing control over something you never realized you were leaning on. How long? I asked quietly. The chair hesitated. As long as it takes. You cannot leave the city, and you must distance yourself from anything that could be a distraction. The cold grip of something old and unwelcome tightened in my ribcage. I ended the call with a heavy certainty sinking through me. I needed to be fully available, fully composed, fully untouchable. And suddenly the small apartment with the repaired lock and the warm cocoa and the boy with hopeful drawings felt like the opposite of everything my world demanded from me in that moment. I sat in the dark office long after the call ended, my hands clasped so tightly they ached. A younger version of myself would have known exactly what to do. Cut ties, focus, build walls, win. But the man I had become these last few weeks hesitated. And in the quiet hesitation, fear slipped in. Fear of hurting them. Fear of them needing something I could not give. Fear of becoming someone they leaned on when I myself had become dangerously unstable. Fear of failing twice in the same lifetime. The last time I had allowed someone close my brother had slipped away while I was too busy proving myself, and I had never forgiven myself for it. I drove to Elise's building without thinking. The rain was heavier now, sliding in streaks across my windshield. I walked up the uneven stairs, each step echoing with a growing ache inside me. But when I reached her door, I did not knock. Instead, I stood there staring at the chipped paint, hearing her laugh faintly through the wood, mixed with Milo's playful chatter. A sound that felt like safety. A sound that made me feel dangerously close to wanting something permanent, something that could not survive the storm brewing in my life. Elise opened the door, suddenly catching me in my hesitation. "Jonah!" She smiled softly, the kind of smile that welcomed without demanding. "Were you going to knock?" I swallowed, words tangled in my throat. I just wanted to check on. She stepped back, waiting for me to enter, but I didn't. Something in me refused to cross the threshold. Not tonight. Not with everything shifting beneath my feet. Elise's brows knitted slightly as she studied me. "What is wrong?" I shook my head. "Nothing." Her eyes sharpened the way they did when she saw more than she was told. "Jonah, something is wrong." I forced a small breath. "Work," I said simply. "It is complicated." Her expression gentled. "Then come in, sit. We can talk." I looked inside at the warmth pooling in the small living room, at the crayons scattered on the floor, at the 2 mugs washed and inverted on the drying rack. A life I could step into if I chose. Something inside me cracked with longing and terror. I shook my head. "I cannot. Not tonight." Her expression faltered. The shift was small, but I saw it. A flicker of uncertainty, of hurt. She stepped closer. "Did I do something?" "No," I answered too quickly. And then, softer, truer. "You did not do anything." Elise waited, silent, steady, patient. The kind of patience that made my chest ache. I could not hold her gaze. I stepped back instead. "I just need time." Her lips parted, then pressed together. She nodded, but it was the kind of nod people give when they are pretending not to feel disappointed. Or afraid. Milo's voice called from inside the apartment. "Mom, is Jonah here?" Elise hesitated. Then she called back gently. "Not tonight, sweetheart. Jonah has to go." A small pause, then Milo's quiet "Oh" drifted through the hallway like a soft bruise. I stepped back another inch. "I will call you." Elise folded her arms loosely. She tried to hide the way her shoulders sank. "Okay," but her voice cracked slightly. "Jonah, do not just disappear." The words hit me like a bruise blooming across my ribs. I opened my mouth to promise something I wasn't sure I could keep, but I couldn't force the lie out. Instead, I turned away, walked down the stairs, each step heavier than the last. My car door closed, sealing me away from the warmth upstairs. As I pulled away, I saw their window glowing faintly through the rain, a small rectangle of soft yellow that made something in my chest twist painfully. I drove into the night without looking back. I did not call the next day, or the day after, or the day after that. And the silence I left behind thickened into something almost physical, pressing against my throat until breathing hurt. But disappearing felt easier than staying, or so I told myself. The first morning after I disappeared, I woke before the alarm, long before the gray light of dawn slipped through the blinds of my apartment. My chest felt tight, not the sharp constriction of panic, but a heavy pulling ache that settled behind my sternum like a weight I could not put down. I stared at the ceiling, trying to steady my breath. I told myself I had done the right thing by stepping back, by not letting myself drift deeper into something I couldn't sustain. The company crisis needed my entire focus. One mistake, one emotional misstep could cost hundreds of employees their stability, their future. I had a responsibility, one I had chosen long ago when I decided success was the only safe place to stand. And yet, the image that kept rising in my mind was not a balance sheet or a boardroom table. It was Elise's face in the doorway, her quiet concern masking something softer beneath. It was Milo's voice calling from inside, hopeful, expectant, unaware that I was already pulling away. I sat up, rubbing my hands over my face. The silence in my apartment pressed in on me. I had never noticed how loud it was before. At work, chaos greeted me like an old adversary. Screens flashed updates, legal teams hurried through hallways, assistants whispered about press inquiries, and frantic investors. I walked through it all with the calm I had learned to wear like armor, but inside, everything felt unmoored. The CFO called me into a meeting. "We need you in Los Angeles by Monday. Appearances matter right now. If the shareholders see you prioritizing personal matters over the crisis, we are done." His tone was professional, not unkind, but firm, a reminder of the world I lived in. I nodded and walked out, my jaw tight enough to ache. But the truth was simpler and harder than the crisis itself. It wasn't just work. It wasn't just duty. It was fear, a deep old fear I had never once admitted aloud. Fear of intimacy. Fear of letting someone matter enough to hurt me. Fear that if I stepped into Elise's life fully, I would fail her the way I had failed Lucas. That wound had shaped me more than any corporate battle ever had. I saw him again that night in a memory that rushed back like a blow. Lucas sitting on the back steps of my parents' house, shoulders shaking silently after another argument with our father. I had walked past him. I had told him to toughen up. I had believed success would save us both. A week later, he was gone. And every time someone reached for me after that, I pulled back. It felt safer to leave first than face the possibility of being left again. And now, with Elise and Milo, everything inside me felt dangerously familiar. They were becoming something I could not dismiss, something I could damage, something that could destroy me if I let myself want too much. I told myself disappearing was for their sake. Elise needed stability. Milo needed consistency. I was neither. But the lie grew thinner each time I repeated it. The second night, I sat in my car outside their building without fully understanding why I had driven there. Lights glowed behind their curtains. I imagined Milo brushing his teeth with foam at the corners of his mouth. I imagined Elise folding laundry on the couch, humming under her breath the way she had once without realizing I was listening. My hand hovered over the door handle, but I didn't get out. I didn't knock. I let the rain blur the windshield until their windows were nothing but smudges of gold. I drove away again. The third day, exhaustion crept into my bones like a slow poison. At the office, I snapped at a junior analyst, something I never did. My assistant asked if I wanted lunch, and I couldn't form an answer. When I passed a reflective panel in the hallway, I hardly recognized myself. The polished CEO was still there, but something in his eyes had hollowed out. That evening, a notification lit my phone, a voicemail. My chest tightened when I saw the name. Elise. I didn't listen. Not right away. Instead, I held the phone in my hand for several minutes, afraid of what her voice might do to the fragile walls I was trying so hard to rebuild. When I finally pressed play, her voice came through soft and steady, but tinged with something fragile. "Jonah, I don't know what happened. If you need space, I understand. But please just tell me you're okay. Milo keeps asking if he did something wrong." The words punched the air from my lungs. I pressed the phone to my forehead, squeezing my eyes shut. I wanted to call her back immediately. I wanted to tell her none of this was her fault or Milo's, that it was me, my fear, my mistakes, my ghosts. But instead, I put the phone down. Cowardice has a quiet sound, a small click as a phone meets a table, a breath held too long, a moment avoided. The fourth day came with consequences. I woke with a migraine crawling behind my eyes. My chest ached with something that felt like grief. I knew then with a clarity I could not run from that disappearing had hurt them more than staying ever could. And it had hurt me most of all. I had become so accustomed to loneliness that I had mistaken it for safety. But meeting them had cracked something open that would not close again. The realization settled over me with a strange sense of inevitability. Running had not protected them. It had only proven I was still ruled by old shadows. And if I kept running, I would never escape them. I sat at my kitchen counter, my hands wrapped around a cup of untouched coffee, and said quietly into the empty room, "I cannot do this anymore." I picked up my phone. My thumb hovered. For once, the fear didn't win. "Elise, can we talk?" I hit send before I could retreat into the familiar dark. Her reply came seconds later. Yes. The single word carried more relief than anything I had read in years. It was time to stop running. It was time to face the damage and repair what I had broken. When I stepped out of the car in front of Elise's building, the late afternoon air carried the cold bite of winter, the kind that slips through your coat and settles against your ribs. I stood there for a moment, hands in my pockets, staring at the familiar steps leading up to her door. The last time I had been here, Milo had waved from the window with both hands, his little face pressed against the glass like he was holding the whole world in place for me. Now there was nothing but stillness. I climbed the steps slowly, each one feeling heavier than the last, and knocked. Not loudly, not softly, just enough to say I am here and I hope it is not too late. The door opened halfway. Elise appeared in the narrow crack, her hair pulled back loosely. Sweater sleeves pushed up, eyes tired in a way that wasn't from lack of sleep, but from trying to understand something that didn't make sense. For a moment, neither of us said anything. Then she stepped back, opening the door fully. "Come in," she said quietly. The living room was warm, softly lit, carrying the faint scent of cocoa and laundry detergent. A blanket lay folded neatly over the couch. A small pair of sneakers sat beside the heater. Everything looked exactly the same as before, and yet nothing felt the same. Elise stayed standing near the arm of the sofa, arms crossed lightly, not defensive but guarded. Her voice was steady. "You disappeared, Jonah. 4 days. No message. Not even a short, 'Sorry, I need space.'" I nodded. "I know, and I am sorry. Truly." I searched for something better than the word sorry, something with more weight and truth, but English has never invented a single word that covers regret, fear, shame, grief, and the hope of a second chance all at once. She studied me with a calmness that wasn't cold, but wasn't soft either. Why, she finally asked. The simplest question, the hardest answer. I looked down at my hands. "Because I thought leaving would protect you." And Milo. Her eyebrows lifted slightly, confusion crossing her expression. "Protect us from what?" "From me," I said. The words felt like I was peeling open a door that had rusted shut for years. I took a breath. I've spent my whole adult life convincing myself that getting close to people only ends one way. I lost my brother because I wasn't there for him. I watched my family fall apart and told myself relationships were risks I couldn't afford. So when things with you and Milo started to matter too much, I panicked. I thought if I left early, the damage would be smaller. Elise did not look away. There was no judgment in her face, only understanding, layered with something that looked like quiet sadness. "And did it help?" she asked softly. "Did disappearing make anything better?" I swallowed. "No. It made everything worse. And that was the truth." She let out a slow breath, her eyes softening in a way that made my chest ache. "You could have just told me you were scared, Jonah. You did not have to vanish." "I know. I know now." The front door suddenly creaked. Small footsteps thumped across the hallway. Then Milo appeared, pajama shirt, slightly crooked socks, mismatched hair sticking up on one side like he had just woken from a nap. When he saw me, he stopped blinking once, twice. Then he ran. Not hesitated. Not shuffled. He ran straight toward me with the kind of wholehearted certainty only a child can give. I dropped to one knee just as he collided with me, arms wrapping fiercely around my neck. "I thought you were gone forever," he said into my shoulder voice, small and trembling. Something in my chest cracked open so sharply I had to close my eyes. "No, buddy," I whispered. "I'm sorry. I should have come back sooner. I'm here now." His little hands tightened on my collar. "Are you staying?" he asked without lifting his head. The question landed deeper than any accusation Elise could have thrown at me. I pulled back enough to meet his eyes. "If your mom says it's okay, and if you want me to, then yes. I'd like to stay." He nodded instantly, as if that settled the whole universe. Then he slipped his hand into mine and tugged me toward the couch. "Come sit. I saved you the middle cushion." I sat down not because I deserved to, but because he asked me to. Elise watched the scene with a mixture of relief and hesitation. The kind of hesitation that comes from wanting to trust, but having been forced to stop trusting too many times before. She sat on the far end of the couch, leaving space between us. Not cold distance, just clarity. "Jonah," she said, after Milo curled up with his blanket. "I won't pretend everything is fine. You hurt me, and you scared Milo." I nodded. "I know, and I won't ask you to forgive me tonight. Just let me prove I can be someone who doesn't run the moment things get real." Her eyes held mine for several seconds. Then slowly, intentionally, she closed the space between us by an inch. Not touching, not dramatic. Just a quiet acknowledgement. A beginning. Milo reached out blindly between us and grabbed both our hands half asleep as if it were the most natural thing in the world. His small fingers rested in my palm, warm and trusting. Elise looked at him, then at me, and something inside her softened in a way I hadn't seen before. Not because I had said the perfect words, not because I had solved anything, but because I stayed, because I came back. That was all. And sometimes that is enough to start again. The morning after I returned, the world felt strangely quiet, as if everything had paused just long enough to let the pieces settle into a shape I no longer feared. I woke before the sun, unable to sleep, my mind turning gently instead of spiraling like it used to. Something inside me had shifted, not healed completely but steadied, anchored by the echo of Milo's small hand wrapped around mine and the way Elise had looked at me last night. Not with certainty, not with forgiveness, but with a soft willingness that felt more valuable than either. I stepped outside before they woke, taking a slow walk down the street. The sky was just beginning to brighten pale blue, stretching softly over the city, and the air carried that crisp promise winter sometimes gives that things can still begin again, even in the cold. I stopped at a small shop that had just opened, bought 3 hot chocolates and a small wooden compass I spotted near the counter, handmade with tiny brass hinges that felt warm in my palm. I did not know exactly why I bought it. Maybe because for the first time in a long time, I felt like I finally knew which direction to walk toward. When I got back, Elise was in the kitchen, hair loose around her shoulders, pouring cereal into a bowl, while Milo sleepily rubbed his eyes at the table. They both looked up. Milo grinned instantly. Elise's expression was gentler, cautious, but warm. I placed the drinks on the counter, then sat opposite Milo as he pushed cereal around with his spoon. "You left early," he murmured, voice thick with sleep. For a second, fear flickered in his eyes, the old fear that people vanish without warning. I leaned forward. "I just went to get breakfast, and I came back." His relief was so pure it almost hurt to look at. Elise watched us quietly, her fingers wrapped around her mug, breathing in the warm steam. After breakfast, we walked to the small park a few blocks away. The wind carried the scent of pine and frost. Milo ran ahead, kicking leaves with the determined joy only a 6-year-old could muster. Elise and I walked slower, not touching, but close enough that the space between us felt intentional. "Jonah," she said softly, her eyes fixed on Milo. "I need you to know something." I looked over at her, waiting. "I am not asking for a promise, and I am not giving one. I just need consistency." I nodded immediately. "That I can give." She studied my face as if making sure she could believe that. Then she exhaled. "All right." Milo called for us from the swings, waving both arms. I jogged over and pushed him gently, listening to him laugh, the sound ringing out in the crisp air like something my life had been missing without me realizing it. When he slowed, he looked back at me seriously. "Jonah." "Yeah, buddy." "If I show you something, will you keep it safe? Always." He hopped off the swing, ran to his little backpack and pulled out a slightly wrinkled drawing. He held it up proudly. It was the 3 of us standing together, me on one side, Elise on the other, Milo in the middle holding both our hands. Above us, scribbled in bright yellow crayon, was a sun, but underneath, in shaky letters, he had written one word: home. It hit me so hard I had to blink. Elise stepped beside me, staring at the drawing with her lips parted gently. Milo beamed. "I made it yesterday," he said, "because I knew you would come back." Elise touched Milo's hair, her fingers trembling just slightly. Then she looked at me. Her eyes were full of a softness I had not earned yet. She offered it anyway. a softness that felt like trust beginning to form leaf by fragile leaf. When we walked back toward the apartment, Milo ran ahead again, leaving Elise and me with a quiet pocket of space. She looked up at me. "What changed for you?" The truth rose easily. "I got tired of being a man who leaves." She nodded once, and the wind tugged a strand of hair across her cheek. I reached up slowly, giving her time to move if she wanted, and tucked it behind her ear. She did not step away. She did not lean in. She simply let the moment exist between us, warm and steady. That evening, as the sky turned deep lavender, we ended up on the roof of her building. Milo, wrapped in a blanket, sitting between us, pointing out shapes he imagined in the clouds. I pulled the wooden compass from my pocket. "I thought about giving this to you," I said quietly to Elise. "But now, I think it is for all three of us." She took it gently, turning it in her hands. The needle swayed, then pointed north. Milo whispered, "So it knows where home is." Elise looked at me, her eyes glowing in the fading light. "Maybe it does now." She placed the compass on the blanket between us, a small symbol but a powerful one. Not a promise, not a destination, just direction. And for the first time in years, I felt like I was moving towards something instead of running from it. As the night settled in, Milo leaned into both of us half asleep, warm and trusting. Elise rested her shoulder lightly against mine, not claiming, not defining, just being. And I understood then that closure was not the ending of something broken. It was the quiet beginning of something chosen, something steady, something earned, something that felt in the simplest and fullest way like home. There are stories that end on a rooftop or at a doorstep or in the quiet breath between two people who finally stop running, but the truth is that your story, the one you carry in your chest, does not end when the video fades to black. Maybe that is why you stayed with us all the way to this moment. Maybe something in Jonah's loneliness felt familiar, or maybe you saw a part of yourself in Elisa's resilience, or in little Milo's hope, that small, brave hope children carry, even when the world has been unfair to them. And maybe, just maybe, a piece of you recognized that longing for home, not a place, but a feeling you once had and are learning to remember again. If this story stirred something in you, it is not an accident. Stories find people at the exact moment they need them most. If you kept watching, it might be because you too have walked through rainstorms no one else saw, or because there was once a moment when someone reached out their hand to you and everything changed, or because you are still waiting for someone to choose you and stay. And that is why we tell these stories. Not for perfect characters or dramatic endings, but for the quiet truth that healing often begins in the smallest moments. A boy whispering, "Will you help us get home?" A man realizing he is tired of living like a ghost. A mother allowing herself to trust again. A family forming not by blood, but by bravery. If you felt your throat tighten, or your chest warm, or your eyes sting at any point, it is because the story was speaking to something real inside you, something soft you may have guarded for a long time. And if you felt seen even just for a heartbeat, then this story did its work. But here is the part most viewers never realize. Stories like this do not end when the characters find each other. They continue in the hearts of the people who watch, in the conversations sparked afterward, in the memories they awaken, in the decisions made quietly in the days that follow. Maybe tonight you will call someone you miss. Maybe tomorrow you will be kinder to yourself. Maybe you will forgive someone. Maybe you will finally allow someone close again. Healing rarely arrives in a grand gesture. It comes in small choices repeated gently. And if this video brought you even 1 inch closer to something you lost or something you long for, then we hope you will stay with us. This channel is more than stories. It is a place for people who still believe that broken things can be mended, that second chances matter, that family can be found in unexpected places, and that even in the hardest seasons of life, grace shows up. If Jonah, Elise, and Milo touched your heart, imagine what the next story might do. So, before you go, we want to ask something simple. Stay. Stay with us for the next chapter, the next healing moment, the next reminder that you are not walking this world alone. Subscribe not for numbers, but for community. Tap the like button if you felt something shift inside you. Share the story with someone who needs to be reminded that kindness still exists. And tell us in the comments what part stayed with you the longest. Was it Milo's innocent courage? Elise's quiet strength? Jonah's decision to stop running? Or was it the moment you realized this story was not just theirs? It was yours too, because somewhere tonight, someone is still waiting for a sign that they are worth coming home to. And maybe this story was that sign. And maybe you staying here with us is the beginning of your next chapter.